when you think of massive scale, can you break us down the problem statement, and then how do you like just go down one by one in order to like just find solutions to each problem statement? If you can take an example of Aadhaar, which was like a big revolution in the Indian economy, how to break that problem statement and how to like impact at massive scale?
Okay, good question. I've always been attracted to hard problems, complex problems, but especially problems that can affect large numbers of people in a positive way, okay, that can transform people's lives. Of course, in Silicon Valley, I worked on hard problems, which are chip design. 300 chip designers working on a tiny chip and packing 5 billion transistors is a hard problem, getting it to work, right? Similarly, Aadhaar was a very hard problem. Okay, 1.4 billion people, ensuring that they get unique IDs. Okay, if I did not have the uniqueness constraint, it's not that hard a problem. But if I have to ensure that Kushal will definitely not get more than one ID, and whether he goes to Kashmir or run to Kanyakumari to try to get another ID, we can make sure that he gets only one ID. That's a very hard constraint, right? And of course, working with people is also more complex. Working with computers work in predictable ways. There are so many different things when you work with a large group of people, right? And Aadhaar was a very, very large system. So let's talk about some of the complexities of Aadhaar and how we deal with it. One is simply the fact that, let's take the example of, like I said, if I have to enroll you, you will give your name, address, gender, and date of birth, and then I will collect your biometrics of your fingerprints, your iris, and a photo of your face. Now, the reason why we're collecting biometrics is to ensure that there is only one record. We are giving you only one Aadhaar. The way we do it is we compare your biometrics against the entire database that we have up to now. If there are a billion people, let's say, already in the database, okay, now there are almost 1.4, but let's say there were a billion people and you came in and said, I want an Aadhaar, and you applied. I have to take your fingerprints, your iris, your face, and check against the entire billion people. But it's not only Kushal who's coming in to get an ID that day. A million other people are coming on the same day. So a million times a billion matches. So since there are 10 plus 2 eyes and 1, so 13 biometrics, 13,000 trillion biometric matches have to be conducted every day so that 1 million Aadhaars can be processed. Okay, that is the complexity of the problem. Okay. At one point, we had more disk space than Facebook because we had to deal with enormous amounts of data coming at us. And we had to, process this correctly and ensure people got their Aadhaars correctly and so on. So that is the scale problem. How do you handle it? You break down the problem. You have fantastic technologists. We had brilliant architect in the UID tech center that we created here. Pramod Verma was the chief architect. Brilliant architect who's made so many contributions, not only to Aadhaar, to UPI, to DigiLocker, and so many other digital public infrastructure that India has created. Sanjay Jain, who was the chief product manager. He was a brilliant guy. Raj Mashwala, who lived in California, founder of several companies there, he had moved here and worked with us. Like that, Vivek Raghavan, who worked on the biometrics piece, today he runs Sarvam, which is creating India's LLM for Indic LLM, right? And so on. So, firstly, you have to bring a bunch of brilliant people who can solve hard problems, right? And we have to work together very closely. This is not designed as a committee. You can't put 100 people and say design Aadhaar. You need brilliant small group of people who can work in depth and figure out how to solve these problems. The other aspect is, when you're building such a massive system, you first will build a system that works for 1,000 people, and then 10,000 people, and then 1 lakh people, and so on. As you do that, the technology breaks down. Okay, as you'll start seeing bugs when you start. This is like you bought a car. Okay, it's a Maruti, but you're running it incredibly fast. At some point, it breaks down, so you need to upgrade it, and we call it refactoring of the software. So you keep improving the software, but the only big challenge here is, it's like improving it while you're flying your plane. You're trying to change the engine and make the engine better. It's a complex problem. So we had to sort of have design our way through this, think our way through this, and solve the problem. Another issue I will tell you, for instance, the false accept rates. These are the errors that creep in into biometrics. We have to manage that and ensure that those don't go beyond a certain point, because if it does, then there's going to be too many errors in the system. And so all of these kinds of technical decisions had to be made, and very disciplined way of approaching and solving these problems is what it takes to address this. Of course, Nandan brought together a team of people from the government, lots of different cadres. Not just when you say government, there's IAS officers, there's IPS officers, there's IFS officers, accounting service, and postal service, and so on. So we had officers from all those different services, and a bunch of us here in Bangalore, we were from the private sector, right? And we had people from NGOs and so on. So he brought together this sort of mix of people who sort of came up with a new culture of how government and private sector could work and deliver on the promise of this massive digital public infrastructure. Aadhaar was the first DPI in the country, so to speak. Then UPI and other things came. But thankfully, because this culture that was brought together and everybody sort of put their best foot forward, and we built Aadhaar. And today the world looks at us. It's done more than 100 billion authentications already, and it's working quite nicely. So that's how you take large problems, but you need not only really bright people working with you, but you also need people from different divergent backgrounds. Okay, that melting pot is important. What works in Silicon Valley in California also works in India. When you have people from different points of view looking at a problem, you get a richer, more mature product. And those are some of the elements, I would say, of how do you deal with a large problem like Aadhaar and how do you solve the challenges there.